Xi Jinping set out to save the Communist Party, but critics say he made himself its biggest threat. Hong Kong CNN. In January 2013, the month after taking the helm of China's ruling party, Xi Jinping gathered the country's top politicians and asked them why the Communist Party of the Soviet Union had collapsed. Xi, of course, already had the answer. It completely denied the Soviet history. The history of the Soviet Communist Party denied Lenin, denied Stalin. He said party organizations at all levels had almost no effect and the army was not there. 9 years later, none of the above applied to the Chinese Communist Party. As General Secretary, Xi has returned the CCP, the center of the Chinese life. Citizens celebrate the party's much edited history en masse at packed red tourism site. Each founder, Mao Zedong, enjoys the new reverence, and once dormant grassroots party cells have been revitalized. Since 2015, Xi has embarked on a widespread program of military reforms and modernization. But as Xi moved to consolidate the party's power, he took great lengths to guarantee his own. He has axed the two-term limit on the Chinese presidency, introduced in 1982 to prevent the rise of dictatorship, accumulated more titles than any CCP leader in recent decades, and created his own eponymous ideology instilled in the party constitution. Now experts in elite Chinese politics were warning that in trying to revitalize the CCP, Xi conflicted himself with the party so totally he created another threat to its existence himself. Kai Sha, a former professor at the top training school for CCP officers who now lives abroad and is a staunch party critic, said by concentrating power Xi had killed the party as an organization. Its 95 million members, he said, were slaves of his will. Xi Jinping, General Secretary of the Communist Party of China Central Committee and Chairman of the CPC Central Military Commission, lays the wreath to the statue of late Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping in Shenzhen on December 11, 2012. Party structures. When Xi laid a wreath before a bronze statue of former paramount leader Deng Xiaoping in Shenzhen, weeks after assuming office in November 2012, to many the message was obvious. The South's manufacturing powerhouse was where Deng had famously pioneered China's era of economic reform in the late 1970s. Xi pundit predicted was offering a sign of things to come. After all, his late father Xi Zhongshun had been a revolutionary veteran and a liberal-minded leader. After being persecuted and jailed during the Cultural Revolution, Xi Zhongshun was handpicked by Deng to govern Guangdong province and oversee the creation of Shenzhen as a special economic zone. Many observers expected Xi to follow in his father's footsteps. They were all wrong. It soon turned out Xi had a very different kind of reform in mind, one that would put the party and country on a significantly different path from the one set out on by Deng. When she took office, outwardly, China seemed stronger than it had been for decades. It had joined the World Trade Organization, held the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and overtaken Japan as the world's second largest economy. From the inside, she saw a party beset by weak leadership, intense infighting, rampant corruption, lax discipline, and faltering faith. She came to power in the face of a fragmentation of the power within the party, said Chai, a former professor at the Central Party School in Beijing. Xi's predecessor, Hu Jintao, was widely seen as a weak leader that, combined with the collective leadership style installed after Mao, had allowed the 9 members of the Politburo Standing Committee, the party's innermost circle, to each cultivate their own turf of unrivaled power. The result was difficult decision-making processes and serious infighting, with the factions vying by their own interest, Kai said. His solution was simple and radical. He opted for a return to one-man rule. He used the wrong way to solve the original problem and made things worse, Kai said. Soon after he came into office, he unleashed a sweeping anti-corruption campaign, which not only targeted corrupt officials but also his political enemies. He oversaw the spectacular downfall of powerful figures such as Zhu Yongkang, a former Politburo Standing Committee member and security seizure, who was jailed for life, and Su Kaohu, a top army general who died of cancer after being expelled from the party. In less than 9 years, 392 senior officials and millions of party cadres had been investigated. Those left knew total loyalty was required for survival. To further concentrate power into his own hands, Xi set up more than a dozen central leading groups to oversee important policy areas including military reform, cybersecurity, finance, and foreign policy. A relic from a Mao era, these informal bodies are secretive and almost never publicized the full list of their members. From what's been revealed in state media reports, Xi personally has at least 7 of them, and many of his loyalists hold important positions. Their party's collective leadership has become a concept in name only, and Xi has become a personification of the party. Kai Xia, a former professor at top CCP training school. These groups not only made policy decisions but also coordinated their implementation. In reality, these leading groups have replaced the normal mechanisms through which the party and the government operate, Kai said. In 2015, he silenced internal dissent. A revised version of the party's disciplinary regulations burned groundless criticism of the party center's decisions and policies. A year later, she was anointed the title of core leader, putting him on par with the past strongmen like Mao and Deng. The party's collective leadership has become a concept in name only, and she has become a personification of the party center, Kai said. Alexandra Kubat, an elite China politics expert at the Lao China Institute at King's College London, said dismantling institutional processes and adopting a personalistic leadership style had created a lot of resentment in the party towards the sea. In the long term, that may prove detrimental for its stability, she said. Concentrating so far power around the sea comes with another problem. It leaves the little space in which to groom a successor. Chinese President Xi Jinping Center attends a military parade with former President Hu Jintao left and Jiang Zemin in Tiananmen Square in Beijing on October 1st, 2019. Succession crisis. Xi's ascension to the top of the CCP wasn't a surprise. All the signs had been there for years. He joined the Standing Committee in 2007 as the son of the former Communist Party leader with governing experience in a major province. Most importantly, he was young enough to stay in the power for 2 terms without turning 68, the loosely enforced age of retirement for the party's top leaders. Now, with 1 year to go before Xi would normally be expected to hand off power in 2022, there is no one on his standing committee similarly qualified. All members are either too old or underprepared. It is seen as the clearest sign yet that Xi, now age 68, intends to stay for 3 terms in office, at least. Nils Grunberg, senior analyst at the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Berlin, said it was possible there would be hints at the successor to Xi at the 20-party Congress in 2022, but nothing could be taken for granted. We don't know how power structures and alliances will develop over the next 5 years, but I think it's fair to say that the succession problem is kind of building in pressure the longer he stays, said Grunberg. Xi hasn't just failed to appoint a successor. The expert said she has almost completely dismantled the system of succession put in place after Mao's death to ensure the party's longevity. I think it's fair to say that the succession problem is kind of building in pressure the longer he stays. Nils Grunberg, a senior analyst at the Mercator Institute for China Studies in Berlin. In 2018, the CCP removed all term limits on the country's presidency, allowing Xi to rule for life if he wanted to. The CCP said the move was necessary to bring the 3 most powerful positions in China into alignment. CCP General Secretary and the Chair of the Central Military Commission, also titled held by Xi, were not subjected to term limit. In a report for the Lowry Institute in April, China politics expert Richard McGregory and Jude Branchett said Xi had built his own power at the expense of the most important political reform of the last 4 decades, the regular and peaceful transfer of power. In doing so, he has pushed China towards the potential destabilizing succession crisis, the report said. 2 high-ranking politicians who had been once touted by multiple experts as potential successors to Xi has been quickly sidelined. Sun Jiankai, the former party secretary of Chongqing was in 2018 convicted of bribery and imprisoned for life. Vice Premier Hu Chunhua was not promoted into the Standing Committee of the Politburo in 2017, stalling his rise. Some of the most high-profile leaders Xi has put in major positions of power were too old to succeed him, including Vice Premier Liu He, 69, and Vice President Wang Qishan, 73. Carl Minchner, a professor in law at Fordham Law School in the United States, said if the criteria for promotion shifted from a focus on competence to the emphasis on personal loyalty to Xi, it could lead to the generation of weak, unprepared leaders. In the 80s or the 90s, there was a degree of show me what you can do, he said. I worry that what's happening now is that the game started to be show me how loyal you are to me personally. Xi Jinping sits on the far left at the G70 Group of 20 Summit meeting in Osaka, June 29, 2019. Internationally isolated, Xi's bullish policies aren't just weakening the party internally, they are compromising its standing internationally. Recent surveys from around the world have shown China's reputation is at its lowest point in decades. A poll survey published in October 2020 found negative attitudes towards China have soared over the past few years in multiple European, Asian, and North American countries, partly due to its handling of COVID-19 pandemic. At the same time, she has called for China to retake its place as the major global power alongside the United Kingdom, the United States, and Russia. A new generation of diplomats nicknamed Wolf Warriors after a patriotic Chinese film series of the same name are driving this foreign policy, fiercely responding to any perceived slight against the party and its leadership. Xi himself has embraced that style. In his speech marking the 100th anniversary of the CCP this month, he warned any foreign countries who try to bully China will find their hands bashed bloody against the Great War of Steel. MacArthur Institute's Grunberg said China had the view that the US and its global influence were in decline, and this was Beijing's chance to assert itself more forcefully. But of course, the way that China tries to address this, that is very much shaped by Xi Jinping, and that's done in a way that received not well internationally, he said. At the G7 meeting in June, the world's largest advanced economies issued their strongest denunciation of China in decades. A major investment deal between the European Union and China is at risk after sanctions imposed by Beijing on EU officials. Australia is calling for investigation into Beijing's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, and India is banning Chinese apps over security concerns and sending troops to its shared border with China. During 4 years of isolationist policies under former US President Donald Trump, the Chinese government failed to bring a single American ally closer into its orbit, a sign of how fully Beijing's wolf warrior diplomacy has been received internationally. In a recent essay in Foreign Affairs, Yan Shatong, a dean of the Institute of International Relations at Tsinghua University said Beijing deliberately rejected new military alliances to avoid being drawn accidentally into armed conflict. It's unclear who would be interested in signing such a treaty with Beijing in the current climate. The future of the party. The longer Xi stays in power, the harder it will be for him to stand down. Richard McGregor, the senior fellow at the Lowy Institute, wrote in his book, Xi Jinping, The Backlash, that if Xi stepped aside the enemies the Chinese leader made in his brutal anti-corruption campaign and his subsequent power grab would likely be waiting to pounce. In a virtuosic display of circular logic, since the supporters maintain that the appointment of the successor would therefore cause instability rather than the other way around, McGregor wrote. Given that risk, Xi might choose to stay in the power for the foreseeable future, or alternatively choose to hand over some of his positions to the successor, but remain the puppet master in a similar fashion to Deng in the 1980s and 90s. For now, the CCP might not be at immediate risk of collapsing or losing his grip on power. In the same way, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union came crashing down into 1990s. But experts said Xi's policies threatened to leave future leaders less prepared to tackle the rising problems facing China, such as slowing economic growth, of falling birth rate, and strategic competition with the US. And there is no question that whoever takes over will have the specter of Xi looming over them, said former CCP professor Kai. After he amassed so much power and made so many mistakes, he's embarking on a self-destructive path of no return, she said.